truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Tuesday, March 5th, 2024, the 1140th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening to the podcast on the day of its release. The only way to do that is by becoming a paid subscriber at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month, and in doing so, you will be supporting me, the work I do, and this show as it expands. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free a couple days later on a wide variety of podcast platforms, and of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Okay, so let's get started where we left off yesterday, because as soon as I put the episode up and I got back to my computer to kind of find out what happened while I was recording, I immediately hear that Jamie Raskin, Friar Cuck himself, is already pressing forward with congressional legislation to declare Donald Trump ineligible due to being an oath-breaking insurrectionist. Now, Friar Cuck, for the last couple of years, has been covering up exactly the thing that makes him Friar Cuck in the first place, which is that bald on top, long hair around the sides, dumb commie head of his. He told everybody that he had some variety of cancer and wore a do-rag around for a while, looking like an absolute buffoon. And then he came back with far more hair than he ever had before. It's amazing. I didn't know cancer could do that. But before I could even finish my discussion of the Supreme Court decision yesterday, Jamie Raskin had already gone on CNN and spoiler alerted my spoiler alert.
Now that you've read the Supreme Court decision, which effectively says that they don't agree with that argument, what's your response?
Well, the court didn't exactly disagree with it. They just said that they're not the ones to figure it out. It's not going to be a matter for judicial resolution under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, but it's up to Congress to enforce it. I disagree with that interpretation just because the other parts of the 14th Amendment are self-executing. People can go to court and say that something violates equal protection, even if there's not a federal statute that allows them to do that. But in any event, the Supreme Court punted and said it's up to Congress to act. And so I am working with a number of my colleagues, including Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Eric Swalwell, to revive legislation that we had to set up a process by which we could determine that someone who committed insurrection is disqualified by Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And the House of Representatives already impeached Donald Trump for participating in insurrection by inciting it. So the House has already pronounced upon that, and there was also a 57-43 vote in the Senate. The question is whether Speaker Mike Johnson would allow us to bring this to the floor of the House.
Now, we have to just take a second and marvel at the fact that Jamie Raskin, who is the son of a prominent leftist, his father, Marcus, started the progressive think tank Institute for Policy Studies, and who himself was an impeachment manager in the fake Trump impeachments, has partnered with Eric Swalwell, the man who is widely known to have had a sexual relationship with a Chinese spy named Fang Fang, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz who was co-chair for Hillary Clinton's 2008 presidential campaign. She then became the leader of the DNC from 2011 through 2016, when her leaked emails exposed that the DNC had been helping Hillary Clinton by rigging the Democrat primary in 2016 against Bernie Sanders. There were also claims about espionage in relation to a man named Imran Awan. And let's spend just a second on that, because I don't think that I've ever talked about this subject on the podcast before. And with Wasserman Schultz's name coming up in a situation like this, it's important to understand the backstory. So according to Wikipedia, Imran Awan was arrested on federal bank fraud charges during an 18-month investigation into alleged misconduct involving congressional computer equipment. He was subject to conspiracy theories involving espionage. On July 3rd, 2018, federal prosecutors concluded their investigation, quote, publicly debunking allegations that Awan, quote, was a Pakistani operative who stole government secrets with cover from House Democrats, end quote. And they are citing an article from the Washington Post there. So you know they nailed this story. If they say it's debunked, oh, well, you can believe it's debunked. It's a conspiracy theory, as they've said. On July 3rd, 2018, Awan pleaded guilty to having made a false representation on a home equity line of credit application. On August 21st, 2018, U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkin sentenced Awan to time served and 3 months of supervision. And you might recognize Tanya Chutkin's name. She is the judge overseeing Jack Smith's January 6th case against Donald Trump. On the supposed conspiracy theories, the Wikipedia entry says these outlets alleged that Awan had unauthorized access to classified government data and that he provided to the Pakistani government and or leaked some of that information. This included the hacking of the Democratic National Committee server in 2015 and 2016, for which the U.S. intelligence community concluded Russia was responsible. President Donald Trump called for Awan to be investigated for espionage in several posts on Twitter, including one in April 2018 when he referred to Awan as the Pakistani mystery man, and another in June 2018 when he wrote, "Our Justice Department must not let Awan and Debbie Wasserman Schultz off the hook." Days after Awan was cleared of espionage accusations, Trump mentioned the conspiracy theory during a press conference with Vladimir Putin at a summit in Helsinki, asking, quote, "What happened to the servers of the Pakistani gentleman that worked on the DNC?" end quote. Trump had been asked if he believed Putin or American intelligence regarding 2016 election interference. The judge who sentenced Awan in the bank fraud case criticized these conspiracy theories, calling them an unbelievable onslaught of scurrilous media attacks to which he and his family have been subjected, adding there had been, quote, accusations lobbed at him from the highest branches of the government, all of which have proved to be without foundation by the FBI and the Department of Justice. In January 2020, Awan and four associates filed a lawsuit against Rosiak, the Daily Caller, and Regnery Publishing in the Superior Court of the District of Columbia, alleging defamation and unjust enrichment. In an interview with the Daily Beast, Awan accused these conservative outlets of essentially destroying his life and said he believed he was targeted because he was a Muslim immigrant. So we have Friar Cuck. We have Eric Swalwell, who is credibly accused of having a relationship with a Chinese spy named Fang Fang, who helped raise money for his election campaigns and also hired an intern in his office. And despite that, by the way, Swalwell remained on the House Intelligence Committee. And then you've got Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was accused of espionage and had to resign in disgrace from her position running the DNC because WikiLeaks caught the DNC rigging the Democratic primaries. These are the people who are going to get together to try to pass congressional legislation in order to enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment against Donald Trump and rule him ineligible, potentially even after he wins the election or after he's inaugurated. Now, Raskin asks, will Mike Johnson bring this to the floor? Of course, Mike Johnson isn't going to bring that to the floor. But who knows what happens after November 5th? And who knows if Mike Johnson will even be the Speaker of the House for that long? We've talked about this plenty of times, so I don't need to rehash it, but I absolutely believe it's a possibility that some uniparty right member of Congress could bring a motion to vacate against Mike Johnson if he doesn't pass spending packages, for instance, and that's coming up in the next few weeks. There is another deadline this Friday, and it's possible, if not probable, that they will kick the can down the road again. We already have another deadline set for March 22nd. I would not be the least bit surprised if this March 8th deadline got shifted to March 22nd and the March 22nd deadline got shifted to March 29th. This seems to be the pattern. But if and when a government shutdown does occur, I expect we'll see a motion to vacate. Raskin is making the argument that the House voted in January of 2021 that Donald Trump committed insurrection in their vote to impeach Donald Trump. I guess he's assuming that that is somehow implicit, that if members voted for the impeachment, then they also already believed that Trump had committed insurrection. But that's not what that vote was about. For a lawyer, he doesn't seem to care a whole lot about the law. He also said that 57 out of 100 senators voted to convict Donald Trump in that impeachment. But neither of those votes are the standard for guilt on the charge of insurrection. Jamie Raskin simply wants a majority in the illegitimate Congress to declare that Donald Trump staged an insurrection, making him then automatically ineligible to be president. Now, it occurs to me, following that decision we discussed last week in Texas regarding the lack of a physical quorum in the House for that 2022 omnibus spending bill. And as a reminder, this is what Ken Paxton had to say last week. Congress acted egregiously by passing the largest spending bill in U.S. history with fewer than half the members of the House bothering to do their jobs, show up, and vote in person. Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi abused proxy voting under the pretext of COVID-19 to pass this law. Then Biden signed it, knowing they violated the Constitution. This was a stunning violation of the rule of law. I am relieved the court upheld the Constitution. Now, I don't remember if there was a physical quorum present in January 2021 when the House voted to impeach Trump over the J6 stuff. But I remember saying back then in 2021, history is not going to record Donald Trump as having been impeached twice because they were both nonsense. The same way that history won't ultimately record Joe Biden as having been president of the United States of America. He wasn't elected. He was installed in office. All of it was legitimate and a product of fraud. It will all eventually be invalidated. So it's amusing to me that Jamie Raskin relies on that vote to suggest that the House might vote to make Donald Trump ineligible under the 14th Amendment. But let's return for just a moment to this collection of characters, because it's one of those times where you think this cannot be happening naturally. This has to be one of those examples where everything is under control, everything is scripted, it's all just playing out. There's nothing that we can do to influence the events. All we can do is understand them. And I think that view makes a lot of sense. The inversion of that view, though, however, is that these people are facing an existential crisis and will pull out all the stops. They will use every single tool in the toolbox they possibly can find to take down Donald Trump before he takes them down. And that's an awfully hard view to talk yourself out of as well. And I think a lot of people in the truth community and among MAGA supporters come down on one side or the other of that. Many people think that everything is planned, everything is scripted. But that viewpoint opens up some problems. Does that mean that characters like Jamie Raskin and Eric Swalwell and Debbie Wasserman Schultz are good people just acting all of this out, acting like the villains in order to psyop people out of the brainwashing they were psyoped into? Or is it just that they've been driven into a corner by exceptionally plotted game theory? Their actions become predictable. Every move they might make is already planned for. And we are simply watching them exhaust all their possibilities before their storyline meets its ultimate end. Is it resignation? Is it arrest? Is it prosecution? Is it imprisonment? Is it the reveal that they've all just been playing pretend the whole time? I kind of tend to think that everything is under control, but that's only because the moves and the counter moves of the opposition, the enemy, have all been planned for and accounted for. And now we have seized control over the means of information. People are beginning to understand the truth. People are beginning to speak up and work their way out of that psyop, kind of unwind through all the lies we've been told for decades in a row. And people like the Raskins and Swalwells and Wasserman Schultzes of the world are left with no choice on how to message and how to operate. Nothing they do is actually going to work, but they still have to do it because what else can they do? Just give up? Now, you might say maybe they've flipped and they're just going along with all of it because that is what they are tasked to do as a result of whatever deal it is they made. Hey, maybe that's the answer too. I don't know the answer. But I do know that we have to account for the possibility that what they are doing is real and authentic and sincere. They actually are trying through these methods to remove Donald Trump, or at least be able to tell the story that they did so that people in the country might believe it. It's easy to say that everything is under control. Everything is just playing out. Everything is scripted. But then you actually have to say what that means. What does that mean? Are the media figures just telling us the story they're supposed to be telling us, even though that story isn't honest? Are political campaigns like Ron DeSantis's kayfabe? And then are politicians like Chip Roy and Thomas Massie, who support him, part of that kayfabe? Or do they just want somebody other than Donald Trump? What about the media figures and the supporters? We went through this at length in context of the Ron DeSantis campaign. But the further down the line you go, the more it starts to blend from that scripted, controlled idea into people acting naturally, following incentives, avoiding punishments, operating in whatever they believe to be their best interests. I mean, I don't feel that my life is scripted. I doubt you feel that your life is scripted. So where does the scripting stop? Are these just actors? Is it all just a TV show? I mean, you can go all the way down this line of thinking, and it's important to at least consider these ideas if we're going to say things like patriots are in control. And please understand, I'm not bagging on these ideas in any way. Like I just said, I think there is a level of control. I think it is the result of incredibly well mapped out game theory that allows for the possibility of any event to spontaneously arise in the world while also having an appropriate response planned and prepped. I also think, as I've mentioned many times, that a lot of what we are concerned about playing out over the course of the next few weeks or few months or even the next year is already stuff that is baked into the cake. There are people in the world who know how this progresses. We just don't happen to be those people. That means that in a very real sense, they are living in an informational future. They are interacting with a world that for them, relative to them, has already emerged, whereas we have no idea whether or not that world will emerge at all in the first place. But regardless, I think it is spectacular and no coincidence that three of the absolute worst members of the uniparty left in Congress are getting together to try to rule that Donald Trump is ineligible to be president, regardless of what the American people think. Now, speaking of members of the regime who do not care what the American people think, Victoria Nuland announced that she will be stepping down from her position at the State Department. This is from today in the Associated Press. Victoria Nuland, third highest ranking U.S. diplomat and critic of Russia's war in Ukraine, retiring. She's a critic of Russia's war in Ukraine. Amazing. Victoria Nuland, the third highest ranking U.S. diplomat and frequent target of criticism for her hawkish views on Russia and its actions in Ukraine, will retire and leave her post this month, the State Department said Tuesday. Nuland, a career Foreign Service officer who served as Assistant Secretary of State for Europe during the Obama administration, but retired after Donald Trump was elected president, returned to government as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs in the illegitimate Biden administration. I added the word illegitimate, obviously. The Associated Press is not a responsible news outlet. Otherwise, they would also add illegitimate. Skipping ahead in the article, She then became U.S. ambassador to NATO before being tapped to serve as the State Department spokeswoman under former Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton during President Barack Obama's first term. As the department spokeswoman and later as Assistant Secretary of State for Europe, Nuland drew the ire of many Russian leaders for her outspoken defense of Ukraine, particularly after Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. Former Secretary of State John Kerry has recalled on numerous times, the AP no longer knows the English language, that when Nuland left the spokeswoman's job during his tenure to become the top diplomat for Europe, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov congratulated him for, quote, getting rid of that woman. Kerry said he replied to Lavrov that he didn't get rid of her. I promoted her. And weird, this article, like all of the other mainstream articles, fails to mention that Victoria Nuland helped overthrow Ukraine in 2014. Announcing Nuland's resignation, illegitimate Secretary of State Antony Blinken published this letter this morning. Victoria Nuland has let me know she intends to step down in the coming weeks as Under Secretary of State for Political Affairs, a role in which she has personified President Biden's commitment to put diplomacy back at the center of our foreign policy and revitalize America's global leadership at a crucial time for our nation and the world. Toria's tenure caps 3.5 decades of remarkable public service under 6 presidents and 10 secretaries of state, starting with her very first posting as a consular officer in Guangzhou, China. Toria has had most of the jobs in this department: political officer and economic officer, spokesperson and chief of staff, deputy assistant secretary and assistant secretary, special envoy, and ambassador. These experiences have armed Toria with an encyclopedic knowledge of a wide range of issues and regions and an unmatched capacity to wield the full toolkit of American diplomacy to advance our interests and values. What makes Toria truly exceptional is the fierce passion she brings to fighting for what she believes in most: freedom, democracy, human rights, and America's enduring capacity to inspire and promote these values around the world. These were the principles that drove Toria when we first met more than 30 years ago. They are the same principles she has brought to her work as Undersecretary and as Acting Deputy Secretary of State, a role she filled seamlessly for 7 months. Over the past 3 years, Toria has led this department on everything from addressing complex crises in the Sahel, Haiti, and the Middle East to broadening and strengthening America's alliances and partnerships across Europe and the Indo-Pacific. And if you're not familiar with the term the Sahel, that is referring to a band of territory in Africa that spreads from Western Africa to Eastern Africa, that acts as a buffer zone between the Sahara Desert and the savannas. And it also happens to encompass the territory of most of those countries who have thrown off the shackles of the global regime and opened up that land bridge across Africa that we've discussed many times. The countries that people like Victoria Nuland would say were overthrown in coups, which might be true if you believed that the governments that were installed by people like Victoria Nuland were legitimate governments in the first place. And of course, they're not. The United Nations has an entire agenda for the Sahel, by the way. This is from their website and the quote-unquote Africa Renewal Plan. The overarching goal of the UN support plan for the Sahel is to scale up efforts to accelerate shared prosperity and lasting peace in the Sahel countries and the region at large by implementing priorities to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the African Union Agenda 2063. Oh man, they want to make all of Africa one country, an African Union, just like the European Union? Gosh, that's crazy. It's like they're trying to centralize the whole world. I mean, they're trying to do it in Africa. They've already done it in Europe. Thank goodness they could never do it in the United States. They couldn't do it in the United States. Damn. Did they already do it in the United States of America? Let's just never think about that ever again. The Sahel, the vast semi-arid region of Africa separating the Sahara Desert to the north and tropical savannas to the south, is as much a land of opportunities as it is of challenges. Although it has abundant human and natural resources, offering tremendous potential for rapid growth, there are deep-rooted challenges, environmental, political, and security, that may affect the prosperity and peace of the Sahel. And you gotta love it when they're talking about a bunch of unnamed Africans being abundant human resources. Now, I don't know if you've thought about the term human resources before. I've thought about it many times, and I gotta tell you, it creeps me the hell out. For this reason, the United Nations has come up with a unique support plan targeting 10 countries to scale up efforts to accelerate prosperity and sustainable peace in the region. Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Chad, the Gambia, Guinea, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, and Senegal. These are countries we've discussed many times over the last couple of years. Victoria Nuland herself was in Nigeria for their last election in order to fortify it, the same way she helps fortify Ukraine's government, and the same way her uniparty colleagues fortify the elections right here in the United States. And let's just spend one more second here with this UN plan. The support plan highlights the enormous opportunities in the Sahel and its vast assets in natural resources, energy, tourism, and culture. It is aimed at mobilizing public resources and triggering private investments in the 10 countries in support of ongoing efforts and initiatives by governments, international and regional organizations, and other partners. It is built around the following 6 priority areas: cross-border cooperation, prevention and sustaining peace, inclusive growth, climate action, renewable energy, and women and youth empowerment. So they want their fellow globalists to heavily invest in taking over these African nations, bringing them back into the fold of that global regime on their path to forming a cohesive African Union in the next 40 years. Man, I bet those Africans sure are excited. I mean, who wouldn't want to be part of the next EU? But let's get back to illegitimate Secretary of State Antony Blinken's letter announcing Nuland's resignation. But it's Toria's leadership on Ukraine that diplomats and students of foreign policy will study for years to come. Her efforts have been indispensable to confronting Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, marshaling a global coalition to ensure his strategic failure, and helping Ukraine work toward the day when it will be able to stand strongly on its own feet, democratically, economically, and militarily. There's so much to admire about Toria beyond her diplomatic skill. She always speaks her mind, to my benefit and to the benefit of our foreign policy. She always stands up for and invests in America's diplomats, mentoring them, lifting them up, and ensuring they and their families have what they deserve and what our mission demands. She finds light in the darkest moments, makes you laugh when you need it most, and always has your back. President Biden and I have asked our Undersecretary for Management, John Bass, to serve as acting Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs until Toria's replacement is confirmed. We are so grateful for Toria's service and for the lasting mark she's made on this institution and the world. You might remember that back in early December, Victoria Nuland's husband, a man named Robert Kagan, is the one who penned that 6,000-word essay for the Washington Post, The Trump Dictatorship, How to Stop It. Kagan is the co-founder with Bill Kristol of the Project for the New American Century, which is probably the most neocon organization you could ever imagine. He is also a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, making him a Brookings colleague of none other than Norm Eisen, the author of the Color Revolution Playbook, and the driving force behind the white papers that were basically copy and pasted and turned into Donald Trump indictments. These people are in the overthrowing governments on behalf of the global regime business. Now, Antony Blinken remarked that Victoria Nuland could always bring a smile to his face, and maybe it's with comments like this one.
With regard to Nord Stream 2, We continue to have very strong and clear conversations with our German allies, and I want to be clear with you today. If Russia invades Ukraine, one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
Now, I apologize. I know the volume on that clip was a bit low, but what she was saying was that if Russia goes ahead and invades Ukraine, that one way or another, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline would not move forward. And we have been told that the Nord Stream 2 was sabotaged in late September 2022, making her words sound awfully prescient. You might remember this track on Victoria Nuland's Greatest Hits album. This is from early 2022 in a Senate hearing with Marco Rubio.
I only have a minute left. Let me ask you, does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
Ukraine has biological research facilities, which, in fact, we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of. So we are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach.
I'm sure you're aware that the Russian propaganda groups are already putting out there all kinds of information about how they've uncovered a plot by the Ukrainians to release biological weapons in the country and with NATO's coordination. If there's a biological or chemical weapon incident or attack inside of Ukraine, is there any doubt in your mind that 100% it would be the Russians that would be behind it?
There is no doubt in my mind, Senator, and it is classic Russian technique to blame on the other guy what they're planning to do themselves.
Classic Russian technique. Get the United States to supply Defense Department funding to Ukrainian biolabs and then link in people like Hunter Biden and Metabiota. Classic Russian technique. She says she's worried that Russia might take over those biolabs and that could be very dangerous. Something in those labs might fall into the wrong hands. But whatever that thing might be that might fall into the wrong hands is definitely not a biological weapon because, that would be something we're not supposed to be doing right on Russia's border. That's the sort of thing that might lead Russia to think, hey, all those little intelligence units that the CIA has been training and funding and equipping for the last decade, maybe those Nazi battalions, maybe the 2014 overthrow of Ukraine, or maybe the 2004 overthrow of Ukraine. And the fact that all of this was happening due to Victoria Nuland and her husband and all of those global communists around them might mean that those biological materials were already in the wrong hands. And let's take just a second for a tangent on these neoconservatives. We've discussed many times that the neoconservative movement is an outgrowth of Trotsky. It's not conservative in any way. It's just global communism by force. It's militaristic adventurism in pursuit of that one world global order. The elite propaganda outlet of the global regime in America published a piece last night called "The Golden Age of American Jews is Ending" by a man named Franklin Foer. And this is an extraordinarily long article, maybe the longest thing I've ever seen in the Atlantic. It's got to be something like 10,000 words. But it ends this way and discusses neoconservatism. After 1967, the previous moment of profound political abandonment, the American Jewish community began to entertain thoughts of its own radical reinvention. A coterie of disillusioned intellectuals clustered around a handful of small circulation journals and think tanks turned sharply rightward, creating the neoconservative movement. Among activists, the energy that had once been directed toward freedom rides was plowed into the cause of Soviet Jewry, which became a defining political obsession of many synagogues in the 1970s and 80s. Meanwhile, Jewish hippies turned inward, creating new spiritual moments centered on prayer and ritual. Although not all of these movements proved equally fruitful, this history, in a way, is cause for optimism. an example of how conflict might provide the path to religious renewal and a sense of solidarity, it's also a reminder that the Golden Age was not an uninterrupted rise. And the article, if the context is unclear, argues that there was this golden age for Jewish people in America that coincided with a golden age for America, and that golden age is coming to an end. The case for pessimism, however, is more convincing. The forces arrayed against Jews on the right and the left are far more powerful than they were 50 years ago. The surge of anti-Semitism is a symptom of the decay of democratic habits, a leading indicator of rising authoritarianism. When anti-Semitism takes hold, conspiracy theory hardens into conventional wisdom, embedding violence in thought and then in deadly action. A society that holds its Jews at arm's length is likely to be more intent on hunting down scapegoats than addressing underlying defects. Although it is hardly an iron law of history, such societies are prone to decline. England entered a long dark age after expelling its Jews in 1290. Tsarist Russia limped toward revolution after the pogroms of the 1880s. If America persists on its current course, it would be the end of the Golden Age, not just for the Jews, but for the country that nurtured them. Now, it's a bit of an odd claim that so-called conspiracy theories become conventional wisdom, not because they're true, but because anti-Semitism has taken hold. And apparently once that happens, everybody just goes around killing Jews. Man, this would all be a whole lot easier to figure out if there weren't this group of people controlling many of the institutions in the world who call themselves Jews despite not really being Jews. And of course, that's where the whole neoconservative project comes in. What does it mean in Franklin Foer's interpretation here? That groups of disillusioned Jewish intellectuals who were members of think tanks and created neoconservatism turned sharply rightward. What about their policies? What about their agenda indicated a turn to the right? They're Trotskyites. They were of the left, and all of a sudden they're just on the right because they're called neoconservatism, and they believe that the world can be taken over, countries can be brought into that one world global order through the use of our military. That is not a right-wing ideology. It doesn't even really make sense. But let's return to Victoria Nuland and close out this AP article because they include some comments from the spokeswoman for the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Maria Zakharova. The AP writes, the Russian Foreign Ministry immediately seized on the announcement, calling it an admission of failed U.S. policy toward Russia. And here's the quote from Zakharova. They won't tell you the reason, but it is simple. The failure of the anti-Russian course of the Biden administration. Russophobia, proposed by Victoria Nuland as the main foreign policy concept of the United States, is dragging the Democrats to the bottom like a stone. After Blinken's announcement, the Gateway Pundit published a piece speculating that her resignation may have something to do with a FOIA request they filed in January for information concerning the death in a Ukrainian prison of a reporter named Gonzalo Lira. Back in January, after filing the FOIA request, Gateway Pundit published a piece announcing the filing of the FOIA request and quoting a piece of it. And this is from that citation. What communication was there since February 22nd, 2022, between the U.S. State Department and the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv regarding U.S. citizen Gonzalo Lira? Specifically, what communication was there since February 24th, 2022, between Acting Deputy Secretary of State Victoria Nuland and U.S. Ambassador in Kyiv, Bridget Brink, regarding U.S. citizen Gonzalo Lira? What communication was there since February 24th, 2022, within the U.S. federal government and between the U.S. federal government and the Ukrainian government, specifically with the Ukrainian Security Service, SBU, regarding U.S. citizen Gonzalo Lira? Now, obviously, it's impossible to know if that was the impetus for her resignation, but they noted that it ordinarily takes about 1 month to have one of those requests filed. It's been about 7 weeks now. So I suppose that if we see the fulfillment of that FOIA request soon and it implicates Victoria Nuland in the imprisonment and death of Gonzalo Lira, then maybe the Gateway Pundit is onto something. suspecting that their FOIA request might have something to do with her resignation. Speaking of people stepping down, now independent senator in Arizona, Kyrsten Sinema, has announced that she will not be running for re-election. So the Arizona Senate race will be Ruben Gallego against Kari Lake. Now, today is Super Tuesday, so 15 different states around the country are holding fake primaries. And sometime this evening, we will hear about how Donald Trump has dominated all of those, or maybe all but one. Maybe they'll figure out a way to rig one of these primaries for Nikki Haley, maybe in Glenn Youngkin's Virginia. That would be absolutely hilarious. Donald Trump is up nearly 50 points over Nikki Haley, according to 538's average of fake news polls. So to find out that Nikki Haley has won anywhere today would be a major shock and would indicate that an election has been rigged. Now, I don't think they're actually going to risk that sort of thing. But if Nikki Haley is contemplating in any way a third-party run and all she can do in the fake primaries is get a win in Washington, D.C., it's going to be pretty hard to take her seriously as a candidate. Yes, she would be trying to attract primarily the votes of wannabe elites on the uniparty right and the uniparty left. But these people primarily don't associate with the Republican Party at all anymore, and it's going to be difficult to convince Democrats to vote for a neocon warmonger. The New York Times published a New York Times Siena poll over the weekend that showed that 97% of Trump voters in 2020 intended to vote for Donald Trump again. Only 1% of the respondents said they wouldn't do that. So there goes the entire rationale for the Ron DeSantis movement and for the Nikki Haley supporters. They are not able to peel off any Donald Trump supporters. None. That same poll says that only 83% of 2020 Biden voters intend to vote for Joe Biden again. 10% plan to vote for Donald Trump. I don't know what the other 7% intend to do, but if you're the incumbent president and you have already lost 17% of your voters in March of an election year, with everything still on a rapid decline for you and your illegitimate administration, you're screwed. That means if we pretend for a second that Joe Biden actually received 81 million real lawful American votes, that he would lose 14 million voters. That would put him at 67 million votes. Donald Trump is already higher than that just based on that poll alone. Now, the vote totals and the polling, it's all garbage. So who cares about these numbers? But they do fall in line with a continuing trend. And we can see that trend reflected in our own experience. But assuming that electoral shenanigans do not change the bottom line result in the fake presidential primaries, Donald Trump will win 15 out of 15 states. Nikki Haley has already indicated that she's going to stick around through the primaries 1 week from now. But what we will hear after tonight is that Donald Trump is the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party. He is obviously the prohibitive favorite to win. Nikki Haley has spent the last couple days making a fool of herself on television, talking about reversing course on her pledge to support the eventual Republican nominee, and unable to directly deny that she might consider running with the No Labels Party. Now, over the last few years, we have heard extensively about the impact of social media on our elections, and so today it was maybe coincidence or maybe not, but major social media platforms experienced outages on this Super Tuesday. This is from TechCrunch. Facebook, Instagram, and Threads were all down in massive Meta outage on Super Tuesday. Reports are coming in that a number of Meta's top social apps, including Facebook and Instagram, as well as its new app Threads, are all experiencing an outage on Tuesday morning. When loading the apps or websites, users receive an error message that, quote, something went wrong, end quote, and to try again later. Or in the case of Facebook, they're taken to a logged out landing page, but are unable to sign in even when using their correct password. The troubles seem to have started at some point after 10 a.m. on Tuesday, according to reports on social media and various user-submitted issue trackers like Down Detector. However, Meta's own status page only shows results related to Meta's business products like Ad Manager, not the platform as a whole. Meta Communications Director Andy Stone confirmed the outage in a post on X, formerly Twitter. "We're aware people are having trouble accessing our services. We are working on this now." So the Meta platforms go down and their comms guy has to go to X, formerly Twitter, in order to announce it. Hilarious. TechCrunch writes, "It's highly unusual for Meta to be experiencing a widespread outage like this given the size and scale of its network and the redundancies built in. For that reason, some people are suspicious about the origins of this outage, particularly because it's election day across a number of U.S. states, which means millions of people are headed to the polls to vote in the primary on what's known as Super Tuesday. This outage, then, comes at a terrible time for any candidates or political organizations looking to do last-minute voter outreach efforts or those reminding people to go vote. And this sounds like some narrative seeding, an excuse in the making about results in a given state or perhaps a set of states, or it could be used as impetus to argue that the government needs to further control the social media platforms in order to, for instance, maintain their stability so that an outage can't affect our very important, very legitimate election processes. Now, you also got to wonder if it could be more than that, if Facebook is more directly linked into our election processes, considering that Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg donated about $500 million in order to rig the 2020 elections. Back to TechCrunch. Meta's suite of apps has played a large role during the election cycle, given its family of apps, which also includes WhatsApp, now reach 3.98 million monthly active users as of the end of last year. And that is obviously a typo. It's 3.98 billion. To quell its potential role in influencing the election's outcome, Meta disabled political ads in the time frame leading up to key elections, like the U.S. midterms. To address newer concerns, Meta also announced it would label political ads with AI-generated imagery for the 2024 election cycle. Related to elections and social media discussions, Meta last week said it would be exiting the news business in the U.S. and Australia with the removal of the News tab in April 2024. Amazon Web Services' Service Health Status currently shows there are no recent issues, but Meta operates its own data centers, which could still be experiencing an issue despite whether or not AWS was seeing a problem. While some people have reported seeing issues with other sites like YouTube and X, formerly Twitter, those platforms appear to be currently up. Ex-CEO Linda Yaccarino posted an update shortly after the news of the Meta outage broke to confirm that X was not seeing issues of its own. Testing, affirmative, everything is functioning smoothly here, she wrote. X-owner Elon Musk, meanwhile, mocked the outage with a meme. In a separate post, he also added, "If you're reading this post, it's because our servers are working." The issues at Meta seem to stretch beyond just its consumer-facing apps, as company employees have also posted on X that they are unable to log into work as well. One Meta Reality Labs employee noted they were even booted out of work mid-meeting, in fact. App developer Nikita Beer, whose app TBH was acquired by Meta, remarked, "Last time Facebook did a forced logout of everyone, it was hacked, where adversaries leveraged a bug with the View As feature. Meta did not indicate that it was hacked today, but the timing had raised people's concerns. Roughly a couple hours after the outage began, it was resolved." In a post on X, formerly Twitter, Stone said, "Earlier today, a technical issue caused people to have difficulty accessing some of our services. We resolved the issue as quickly as possible for everyone who was impacted, and we apologize for any inconvenience." And finally, as voters head to the polls to vote in the fake primaries today, they get to enter the polls with this in mind. This is the Daily Mail from this morning. Biden administration admits flying 320,000 migrants secretly into the U.S. to reduce the number of crossings at the border. Has national security vulnerabilities. Joe Biden's administration has admitted transporting migrants on secret flights into the U.S., and lawyers for its immigration agencies claim revealing the locations could create national security vulnerabilities. Customs and Border Protection has refused to disclose information about a program last year secretly arranging flights for thousands of undocumented immigrants from foreign airports directly to U.S. cities. It means that while record numbers of migrants were flown over the southern border last year, the Biden White House was also directly transporting them into the country. Use of a cell phone app has allowed for the near undetected arrival by air of 320,000 aliens with no legal rights to enter the United States. It comes after a controversy over a 2022 transportation program in which the administration used taxpayer money to move migrants throughout the country on overnight flights. And hey, Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis did the same thing. Included in the details of a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit first reported by Todd Bensman at the Center for Immigration Studies, found Biden's CBP approved the latest secretive flights that transported hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants from foreign countries into at least 43 different American airports from January through December 2023, just 2023. The program was part of Biden's expansion of the CBP One app, which kicked off at the start of last year. Migrants were able, under Biden's expansion, to apply for asylum using the app from their home countries. But the Center for Immigration Studies notes that the transportation of these migrants directly to the U.S. is one of the lesser-known uses of the app. Aliens who cannot legally enter the U.S. use CBP One to apply for travel authorization and temporary humanitarian release from those airports. Under this parole release, migrants are able to remain in the U.S. for 2 years without obtaining legal status and meanwhile are eligible for work authorization. The administration first said it would not reveal which airports the undocumented aliens were transported to, citing a law enforcement exception in the refusal to hand over information. But new information from the CIS lawsuit reveals the locations were not disclosed due to fear that bad actors would inflict harm on public safety or the information would create law enforcement vulnerabilities. And honestly, this article seems like it's written by AI. I'm not saying the story's not true or anything. I'm just saying this article seems like it's written by AI. Elon Musk posted this story on X, formerly Twitter, and commented, "It's highly probable that the groundwork is being laid for something far worse than 9/11, just a matter of time." And that's pretty bleak. But of course, Donald Trump has said that too. He said it was 100% likely that there would be a terrorist attack on American soil due to Joe Biden's open borders and the migrant crime that follows. And considering that the Uniparty is still pressing forward, trying to push through the unipartisan compromise, we're in the sort of moment where an event like that seems to increase in likelihood because it's the sort of thing that could get everybody back on the same page. And naturally, we can all hope and pray to avoid that. That's it for today. I will be back tomorrow at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under a quarter per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree. Linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's hell!